What happens when a single woman dares to stand against an entire corrupt system? This is the true story of courage, resilience, and justice, a journey that proves one voice can shake the foundations of power. Stay with us to discover how Mira Dev changed Valdora forever. Before we dive into this incredible story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an inspiring journey like this. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Mira Dev stepped out of her modest government quarters. Her sari was plain, light blue with a faded gold border, the kind worn by any ordinary woman in Valdora. No convoy. No sirens. No aide-de-camp to open her gate. Just her documents tucked in a jute bag, and a second-hand scooter that grown to life with a kick. Today was her brother's wedding. A rare day off. A day she had promised to be present not as an officer, but as a sister. The district headquarters was still waking up, vendors setting up their stalls, chai shops clinking metal cups, school children dragging satchels half their size. Mira weaved through them, focused but smiling softly behind her helmet, the only thing that hinted at discipline. But a few kilometers out, the world shifted. A crude police barricade sliced across the road, manned by 3 uniformed officers basking in the early sun. One of them, taller and bulkier than the rest, waved her down with a lazy gesture. She slowed the scooter and removed her helmet as the man approached. "No helmet, ma'am," he said, already accusatory. "I was wearing it. Just took it off to speak with you," she replied evenly, voice low but clear. He sneered. "You think you're clever? Where's your license, vehicle papers? Show me everything." Mira opened her bag without protest, pulling out the documents. She extended them with both hands. The officer barely glanced. His eyes scanned her face, her clothes, her scooter, all unimpressive. He didn't recognize her. "Good," she thought. "You're out of compliance," he snapped. "This scooter, it's registered in another district. Are you smuggling something? Are you trying to avoid road tax?" She blinked. "No. Everything is in order. You're free to verify." "Don't teach me my job, woman." He stepped closer. Too close. "You think your calm voice can fool me? These soft ones are always the most corrupt." She didn't move. She didn't flinch. He grabbed her documents and tore one slightly at the corner. "You think this is valid? This expired a week ago. That's a criminal offense." "Please look again," Mira said, with surprising gentleness. His eyes flashed. In one abrupt motion, he slapped her across the face. Time froze. The other 2 officers looked away. Mira stood still. Her cheek burned, but she didn't touch it. She simply looked at him, and in that moment, something in her silence disturbed him. "Bring her in," he barked to the others. "Charge her. We'll make her talk." One of them hesitated. The other moved toward her, confused. Mira didn't resist. She picked up her torn documents, placed her helmet back onto her scooter, and followed them. Nobody knew her name. Not yet. But the moment she entered that police station, the story of Valdora would begin to change forever. The police jeep jolted violently over potholes as Mira sat in the back, hands clenched in her lap. The sun was higher now, unforgiving in its light, but the shadows inside the vehicle felt colder than night. Neither officer spoke. Her documents lay crumpled on the dashboard. Her scooter was left behind, parked crookedly near the checkpoint. When they arrived at the station, a rusted blue gate opened with a reluctant screech. Mira stepped out without waiting to be told. A thin trail of dried blood stained the corner of her lip. Still, she held her back straight, her silence thick as armor. Inside, the station was a mess of chaos and lethargy. A man in handcuffs sat weeping in a corner. A woman argued with a constable about her missing son. Somewhere deeper inside, a shout followed by a sharp cry pierced the air. Someone was being beaten. No one reacted. "Put her in the holding cell," Rakesh Thorne ordered, wiping sweat from his brow as if the act of slapping her had drained him. "We'll file charges after lunch." "What are the charges, sir?" asked a young constable, clearly uneasy. "Theft. Bribery. Harassment of an officer. Write whatever fits. Just make it stick." Mira was led down a narrow corridor. The walls were stained with years of neglect. Peeling posters of missing persons and anti-corruption slogans hung like a cruel joke. As she passed, Two officers laughed behind their teacups. She said nothing. The cell was small, no fan, one broken bench, a rusted iron door. A woman inside looked up at her, bruised and broken. Their eyes met. No words passed, but something did. Recognition. Pain. Strength. Mira sat. Quiet. Watching. Listening. Through the bars, she saw a man being dragged by his collar, slapped repeatedly. Another accused of pickpocketing was forced to sign a blank sheet of paper. The station wasn't a place of justice. It was a theater of power, where fear was currency, and silence was guilt. An hour passed. Then 2. Rakesh returned, swaggering in. Still not speaking, are you? Think your silence makes you noble? You think this is a movie? He reached for his belt. Just then, another voice cut through the tension. Sir, may I speak with you privately? It was Officer Arif Patel, standing tall at the door. Rakesh turned, annoyed. What is it now? There's something odd about her. I checked the list. No cases match her name. And the license number, it traces back to a government-issue vehicle, reserved for Class 1 officers. Rakesh's face stiffened. He glanced back at Mira. She sat still, watching, not hiding, not speaking, but seeing everything, and remembering. Somewhere deep in the bowels of the corrupt station, a crack had just formed. Rakesh Thorne stepped out of the holding area and slammed the file onto his desk. Arif stood quietly in front of him, hands folded behind his back, jaw clenched but composed. So you're doubting my orders now, Patel? Rakesh barked. You think she's someone special just because she's quiet and neat? Arif met his superior's glare. No, sir. I'm just saying the ID number on the scooter is tagged under restricted government fleet, usually assigned to Class 1 officers. Rakesh grunted, pacing. Could be stolen. Could be faked. These people are clever. Maybe. But her demeanor, sir. She didn't flinch, didn't argue. Most people scream the moment they're pulled in here. She didn't even ask for a phone call. So? Maybe she's in shock. Maybe she's hiding something worse. Arif hesitated, then added, or maybe she's letting us dig our own grave. Rakesh froze mid-step. His eyes narrowed. For a moment, the tension between them was taut as a drawn wire. Then he laughed bitterly. Fine. You think she's someone? Go ahead. Run her prints. Call the transport office. Waste your time. Back in the holding cell, Mira still sat motionless, her eyes studying everything. The cracks in the walls, the exchanges between officers, the casual bribes passed like sugar packets. The woman beside her whispered, "Why are you here? You don't belong here." Mira offered the faintest smile. "Neither do you." Arif returned 20 minutes later. He stopped just outside the cell door, holding a thin file. His eyes found hers. There was a shift in his gaze now, not suspicion, but something closer to awe. He stepped aside, whispered to the constable beside him. Moments later, Rakesh received a call from Commissioner Neil Rawat himself. The color drained from his face. "What do you mean she's the SDM?" His voice cracked the air like a whip. Every officer in the station looked up. Inside the cell, Mira stood. Not in protest. Not in anger. But with the poise of someone who had given her enemies every opportunity to expose themselves. The strike never came. Because the blow had already landed, silently, completely, and without lifting a single finger. Rakesh Thorne was still reeling when the door to his office burst open. "Commissioner Rawat on the line," a constable shouted, holding the receiver out like it was on fire. Rakesh snatched the phone. "Yes, sir." The voice on the other end was ice cold. "Is Mira Dev in your custody?" Rakesh's throat clenched. We had no idea, sir. She didn't identify herself. She refused to." "She didn't need to," Rawat snapped. "You're a senior inspector, not a street thug. You don't lay a hand on anyone, especially not an SDM. I'm en route. If she isn't released in the next 10 minutes, I'll have your badge and your neck." The line went dead. Outside the office, Arif stood frozen, watching Rakesh pale. The station had gone eerily silent. Whispers spread like wildfire. SDM? That woman? The constable who had helped drag Mira in was now avoiding everyone's eyes. Another began quietly removing the fake case file from his desk drawer. Inside the cell, Mira heard the commotion. She stood, adjusting the pleats of her sari. Her cheek was still bruised, but her posture was unbroken. Ariv appeared at the door, keys in hand. He unlocked the gate, slowly, hesitantly. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. We didn't know." She stepped out, looked at him. No nod, no words. Just the weight of silent dignity. Rakesh stumbled into the corridor, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked like a man on the edge of collapse. "Madam, please, it was a misunderstanding. You should have identified yourself." Mira stared at him. Then, with calm precision, "You identified me the moment you chose to slap a silent woman for not begging." No yelling. No threats. Just truth. And it landed harder than any punishment ever could. Moments later, tires screeched outside. Commissioner Neil Rawat stepped in, flanked by 2 aides. His eyes locked onto Myra's, then scanned the chaos of the room. His jaw tensed. "Inspector Thorne, hand over your badge. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending full investigation." Rakesh opened his mouth, but couldn't speak. He slowly unpinned the badge from his chest. The weight of it felt heavier now than it ever had. Rawat turned to Mira. "Ma'am, we owe you an apology. This station—" "Will speak for itself," she interrupted. "I've seen enough. And I'll be back." She turned to Ariv. "Escort me to my vehicle. I assume my documents weren't burned." "Of course, ma'am." As they walked out, every officer stood frozen. The walls, once thick with arrogance, now seemed to tremble under the weight of her silence. The phone call had shaken the station. But Mira Dev had already begun shaking the very system it stood on. The day after the commissioner's visit, the district of Valdora seemed to hold its breath. Rumors raced through the streets, spreading faster than wildfire. The SDM had been arrested. The senior inspector suspended. And the police station? On the brink of collapse. Mira Dev returned to her modest quarters, but the air around her had changed. It wasn't just the bruises fading on her cheek or the torn documents. It was the weight of expectation settling heavily on her shoulders. People were watching. Waiting. Her phone buzzed incessantly, messages from journalists, activists, even ordinary citizens who had once suffered in silence. Each message carried the same plea: "What will you do now? Will you fight?" Inside her small room, the walls seemed to close in, but Myra's eyes shone with quiet fire. She knew the path ahead would be a battlefield. The corrupt forces she'd unearthed were deep-rooted, their tendrils entwined with politicians, bureaucrats, and even some of her own colleagues. At the district headquarters, the atmosphere was electric. Officials whispered behind closed doors. A special investigation team had been formed. Dozens of police officers and government workers were summoned for questioning. The news cameras clamored outside the station. Myra's phone rang. It was Ariv Patel. "Ma'am," he said, voice low but steady, "the first arrests have been made. Officers who conspired to fabricate evidence, those who took bribes, they're being suspended and detained. The commissioner is pushing for a complete audit." Mira closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her. The reckoning had begun. But with it came threats. Anonymous calls warning her to back down. Shadowy figures tailing her movements. Her family receiving veiled intimidations. The fight for justice was no longer just professional, it was deeply personal. Yet Myra's resolve hardened. She began meeting with trusted allies, honest officials, local journalists, and community leaders, to plan the next steps. Every document, every testimony had to be meticulously gathered. Every voice silenced before had to be amplified. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mira stood on the balcony of her home, looking out at the flickering city lights. A single tear traced down her cheek, not from pain, but from the weight of responsibility and hope intertwined. She whispered to the night, "This is only the beginning." Behind closed doors, in the heart of Valdora, the system trembled. And Mira Dev was ready to bring it down, piece by piece. The news broke like thunder across Valdora. Rakesh Thorne, the once feared senior inspector, was officially arrested. His mugshot flashed across every news channel, splashed on front pages, and debated on talk shows. For many, it was a shock. For others, a long-awaited relief. But no one doubted the significance. Inside the police station, the atmosphere shifted overnight. The thick veil of silence and fear that had once smothered the place began to unravel. Officers who had once boasted about their impunity suddenly lowered their eyes. Conversations became hushed whispers. Doors closed behind locked meetings. Mira Dev watched all this unfold with a steady gaze. She knew that while one man's fall was a victory, it was only the first tremor in a much larger quake. The corrupt system was a many-headed beast, and each head needed to be severed carefully. Her phone rang frequently now. Calls came from courageous whistleblowers within the force, officers tired of the lies, the beatings, the fabricated cases. They spoke in guarded tones, sharing details of bribes, cover-ups, and abuse that had poisoned the district for years. With Arif Patel's help, Mira began building a network inside the station, a web of trusted allies committed to truth. They met in secret, exchanging encrypted messages, gathering evidence, and planning the exposure of the rot that ran deep. But the pushback was fierce. Threats escalated from veiled warnings to direct confrontations. One night, as Mira returned from a meeting with a local journalist, her car was blocked by two unknown vehicles. The windows were rolled up, but the intentions were clear. Yet Mira did not waver. Her courage galvanized the community. Ordinary citizens, long resigned to injustice, began to come forward with their own stories. Women who had suffered harassment. Families whose pleas for help were ignored. Young men framed by corrupt cops. The walls were closing in on the corrupt elite. In a tense meeting at the district office, senior bureaucrats whispered in fearful tones. Politicians who once dismissed the SDM as powerless now scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Alliances shifted overnight. Loyalties fractured. One thing was clear, the arrest of Rakesh Thorne was not the end, it was the spark that ignited a firestorm. And as that fire grew, so did Myra's determination. She was no longer just a victim. She was the reckoning itself. In the quiet moments when doubt threatened to creep in, Mira remembered the faces she had seen in that holding cell, the broken, the silenced, the oppressed. She knew that if she faltered, they would suffer again. So she pressed forward. Because when one man falls, many tremble. And the fall of one could bring down them all. The sun rose over Valdora like any other day, but beneath the bright skies, the district was bleeding. The wounds were invisible to the casual observer, whispered rumors, quiet protests, and broken families. Yet, those wounds were deep, carved by years of corruption, abuse, and shattered trust. Mira Dev felt the weight of every broken promise as she walked through the crowded streets. Faces stared at her, some filled with hope, others shadowed by fear. Mothers clutched their children tighter, shopkeepers closed their shutters early. The city was wounded, and the pain was palpable. News reports showed images of protests outside the police station. Voices rose demanding justice, accountability, and reform. But with every shout for change, there was a backlash. Menacing figures lurked in the shadows, intimidating witnesses and activists alike. Myra's own allies faced brutal reprisals. Arif Patel narrowly escaped an attempted assault after refusing to cover up evidence. A local journalist was threatened with violence for publishing damning exposés. Community leaders were coerced into silence by phone calls dripping with menace. Inside the district offices, the air was thick with tension. Meetings were secretive and tense. Every step toward reform met resistance, from sabotage of investigations to mysterious disappearances of files. The old guard fought fiercely to maintain their grip. Mira spent long nights poring over reports, testimonies, and surveillance footage. Every piece of evidence was a reminder of the human cost, families torn apart, lives ruined. The burden was immense, but she refused to relent. One evening, a young woman approached Mira outside a crowded temple. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her hands trembling. "Madam," she whispered, "my brother was taken by the police 3 months ago. They say he escaped, but no one has seen him since. Please, help us find him." Myra's heart clenched. Stories like these were countless, etched into the fabric of Valdora's pain. This was why the fight mattered. She gathered her team and mapped out a plan to investigate the missing persons linked to police abuse. It was dangerous work, but necessary. As dusk fell, Mira stood by the riverbank, watching the water flow silently. Valdora was bleeding, but beneath the surface, the current of change was growing stronger. Her voice echoed in the quiet night, "We will heal. We must." The scars of Valdora were many, but its heart beat fiercely, fueled by those who refused to let injustice win. And Mira Dev was leading the charge, no matter the cost. The quietest moments often held the loudest truths. In the dim light of a cramped room, Mira Dev sat surrounded by a handful of weary faces, survivors of Valdora's darkest nights. They had come to her not in rallies or protests, but in whispers, sharing stories that the world had tried to bury. An elderly man recounted how his son, a bright student, was picked up one evening and never returned. A mother spoke of the bruises her daughter hid beneath long sleeves, too afraid to speak of the violence at home, violence masked by the police's indifference. A young man, his eyes haunted, described the days spent in the holding cell, beaten for crimes he never committed. Mira listened, every word etching itself into her soul. She had seen the system's cruelty firsthand, but here, in these voices, lay the true cost of corruption. These were not just stories, they were lives shattered, dreams stolen. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual chaos, unaware of the quiet revolution stirring behind closed doors. The media spotlight had shifted elsewhere, but Mira and her growing circle knew the battle was far from over. They began recording testimonies, collecting evidence, weaving together the threads of abuse into a tapestry impossible to ignore. Each voice gave strength to the next, forming a chorus rising from the silence. But the shadows were watching. Threats escalated, subtle at first. Anonymous notes slipped under doors, cold stares from passing strangers. Then came the attacks, broken windows, sabotaged equipment, even an arson attempt at the office where testimonies were stored. Yet, every blow only strengthened their resolve. Mira refused to let fear silence them. One evening, as the group dispersed, a young woman stayed behind. Her hands trembled as she handed Mira a small envelope. Inside were photographs, clear evidence of police brutality, names, dates. "I've hidden this for months," she whispered. "I was afraid. But not anymore." Mira nodded, feeling the weight and power of that trust. This was the ammunition needed to break the cycle. She looked out the window at the city lights, a faint smile touching her lips. The voices in the silence were growing louder. And soon, no one would be able to ignore them. The courtroom was packed. The air was thick with anticipation, whispers bouncing off the high ceilings like the heavy footsteps of justice finally marching forward. Valdora's long shadow of corruption was being illuminated under the harsh glare of truth. Mira Dev sat quietly at the front, the weight of the city's hopes resting on her shoulders. Around her, dozens of officers, once cloaked in impunity, now stood accused, their faces pale and eyes darting nervously. The charges were staggering: bribery, abuse of power, falsifying evidence, and collusion with corrupt politicians. The evidence compiled by Mira and her allies was overwhelming: video footage, testimonies from victims, financial records tracing illicit payoffs. One by one, the accused were called to stand. Some denied everything with trembling lips, others broke down, confessing to years of wrongdoing. The public gallery murmured in shock as the names rolled out: officers who had terrorized neighborhoods, bureaucrats who had turned a blind eye, officials who had siphoned funds meant for the needy. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered, chanting slogans for justice and reform. The city held its breath, watching as the pillars of a rotten system began to crumble. For Mira, the victory was bittersweet. Every arrest represented a life ruined, not just those accused, but the communities torn apart by their actions. She remembered the faces she had met along the way: the mother who lost her son, the young man who endured endless nights in a cell, the elderly woman who had waited decades for justice. After the trial, Mira addressed the crowd, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Today, we hold 40 accountable. But this is not the end. It is a new beginning. A promise that no one is above the law, and that Valdora will heal." Yet, even as applause echoed around her, the battle ahead was clear. The corruption had many roots, and uprooting them all would take time and courage. But for the first time in decades, the people of Valdora dared to hope. Because the fall of 40 was more than just numbers. It was the fall of fear itself. And the rise of justice. The early morning haze clung to the streets of Valdora as Mira Dev mounted her scooter once more. The same worn vehicle that had carried her through years of struggle, through battles fought in shadows and under blinding scrutiny. Today it felt different, heavier yet lighter, as if it bore not only her journey but the hopes of a city reborn. Her sari fluttered softly in the breeze, plain as ever, untouched by the trappings of power or ceremony. There were no guards, no fanfare, just a woman who had chosen to stand alone against a tide of corruption and injustice. As she began her ride through the waking town, familiar faces emerged from doorways and markets. Some nodded with quiet respect, others smiled with newfound hope. Children playing in dusty lanes paused to watch, eyes wide, sensing the unspoken promise in her passage. Her mind drifted back to that fateful day when a simple ride to her brother's wedding had turned into a reckoning. The bruises and scars were gone, but the lessons remained etched deep within her soul, the cost of courage, the price of truth. Passing the old police station, now a symbol of transformation, Mira felt a surge of quiet pride. The fortress of fear had crumbled. The corrupt officers replaced, the system cleansed by relentless pursuit of justice. Yet she knew the road ahead would never be easy. The roots of injustice ran deep, and vigilance was the price of freedom. But for now, she rode with a steady heart, alone yet unyielding. Through winding streets and sunlit paths, Mira Dev carried with her a story of resilience, integrity, and the power of one. She rode not just for herself, but for every silent voice that had found its strength. And as the wind whispered through the trees, the city seemed to breathe anew. Because she had proven that one person, riding alone against the storm, could change the world. Mira Dev's story reminds us that no matter how dark the night, the light of integrity and courage can break through. One person's determination sparked a movement that brought down corruption and gave hope back to a city. Her ride wasn't just a journey, it was a revolution. If Mira's story inspired you, make sure to subscribe and share this video. Join our community to support more stories of real courage and change. Together, we can make a difference.